Alright, howdy, Dr. Hudson. This is my video about the cell membrane lab that we're doing today. So I'm just going to go over my diagram that we have here that I've kind of laid out all the different terms that we had to define. So I have to start off with the plasma membrane itself, which is the most important one. I started off by saying that cells have both plasma membrane and vesicles, just because I wasn't really sure where else to put vesicles, as part of the cell, which is vacuoles and different internal cavities of the cell, but the plasma membrane is the important part. The plasma membrane is composed of the phospholipid bilayer, and that phospholipid bilayer has both the hydrophilic head of the phospholipid and the hydrophobic tail of phospholipid, which kind of combine together, and I have that drawn over to the sandwich model by Dapson and Dinelli that has to do with how the zones are arranged. The protein is separated by the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic zones of the cell. Okay, so there's that. Also included the empathic molecule, because that kind of seemed to go with the phospholipid terms that I have defined here. And then let's see. The next section is how the actual membrane itself is made of membrane proteins, the integral membrane protein, the peripheral membrane protein. And that's kind of how the membrane itself is composed of those individual proteins. And then the additional terms I had were the glycoprotein, which has to do with the surface of the membrane itself. And then I included proteoglycan and sterols steroids, just because those terms didn't really go with anything else and kind of just have to do with the internal components that are going to be found within the cell, especially with regards to the membrane. So the next section I have here has to do with actual transport within the membrane, the different channels, the membrane channel and the ion channels, just how the membrane gets these different resources inside of it. And then I have the two main transport systems broken up, the passive transport and active transport. So with passive transport, there's channel-mediated passive transport, which ties back into the membrane and ion channels that I have up here. Ions can move across the layer. There's the electrochemical gradient and the concentration gradient, as well as the gated ion channel, which have to do with how it determines it's going to transport those molecules across the cell membrane, with either electrochemical potential or the concentration of the solution. And so that ties into how I've got the next section, which is still part of passive transport: simple diffusion, and osmosis and selective permeability, which all have something to do with passive transport. Just the molecules themselves passing back and forth between the membrane without any additional energy required. And then also included how the solution itself will be either hypertonic, hypotonic, or isotonic, which just has to do with the pressure of the solutions. And I felt like that tied best with osmosis, which is why I have that tied to that there. Okay, so next section here is about active transport, or just using energy to transport molecules across the system. So I have the detergent molecules, which didn't really go anywhere else, but they kind of have to do with spreading out the chemicals within the cell itself, and that obviously is going to require energy, or at least enzymes and resources. But the next section, which has to do with the different proteins that are involved in active transport, there's the transporter membrane protein, anchor membrane protein, and I'll come back to that one. There's the receptor membrane protein, enzyme membrane protein, monolayer associated membrane protein, lipid linked membrane associated protein, and protein attached membrane associated protein. Ugh. So all those are just different proteins that have to do with different processes within the cell. Obviously, there's transporting the individual ions. The anchor membrane proteins has to do with saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. So I've got an arrow tying over to the anchor membrane proteins. Receptor membrane has to do with the receptors, obviously sending signals. Enzymes, that's pretty self-explanatory as well. And the rest are just all part of the active transport system. And then I have that tied over to the fluid mosaic model, has to do with the phospholipid bilayer and the hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions of the protein. And I kind of have that tied together with my first diagram, that was the sandwich model, which both, of course, tie back to the phospholipid bilayer, which I started out talking about as a part of the plasma membrane. So that pretty much covers all the terms that we had to define. I know this chart's kind of all over the place, and some of these terms, like, I just kind of grouped them together more because they had to do with a lot of the same thing, like simple diffusion, osmosis, and selective permeability are all really similar concepts, so those are grouped together, as well as the different proteins and how they all have to do with active transport. But anyway, I hope that covers it all. Thanks for watching.